Welcome to the College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line. Here's Shehan J. Haraja and Bobak Hayeri.
Hey everybody, it's the College Football Survivor Show. I'm Bobak Hayeri with my co-host Shehan J. Haraja, national college football writer for CBS Sports. We're glad to have you with us. And we're still in the middle of the Media Day schedule. This week it's ACC, Big Ten, American, Conference USA, and Sun Belt, wrapping it all up. But we're stepping away from that PR dog and ponies show to instead take a look at the 10 players we think that could define the college football playoff race. After all, we are the College Football Survivor Show, and we are running up to a season where we need to start thinking about a race for 12 spots in that playoff. But before we dive in, let me remind you, you can find us on X and TikTok at CFP Survivor Show, where we have video highlights of the show, run polls, and listen to your feedback. Please take a moment to like, rate, and subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. All of that said, how are you doing, Shehan?
I'm doing great. Yeah, it's been a busy couple of weeks. You know, it's funny. So I don't remember if I mentioned this on the podcast, but I took essentially the whole month of June off from my job at CBS Sports for paternity leave. And I don't think I mentioned it publicly, but it was a quiet month anyway, thank God. But then I immediately came back. When I first started work, I went to Vegas for Big 12 Media Days. All of last week, I was at the Omni Hotel in Dallas for SEC Media Days. So I was looking, this is the first day that I've had a normal day of just sitting in my home office by my computer since May 30th. So it's a little weird. It's a little weird. I was joking because especially with me not being full-time at work, and I still did the podcast, so I needed the office for that. But my wife had just completely holed up in the office whenever she was working from home. So yesterday I was like, I need your keyboard gone. I need your mouse gone. I need it all gone. This is mine again. I'm back to work. So definitely fun. So today she's like, well, then forget that. I'm gonna go into the office today, and my mother-in-law is still in town to help watch our daughter. So it's but she was great. Obviously, it was just so weird to think about. I guess this is back to being my office again.
Yeah, it's like we're getting into that stretch where it's starting to go back to a good grind. I don't mean it in a bad way, but like the grind of the season's coming up. Yeah, here we go. So this week, or at least this episode, we wanted to talk about 10 of the players who could help define the college football playoff race. Obviously, there's a lot of contenders because it's, again, 12 teams. It's still funny to get our heads wrapped around that. It makes it more open than ever. And so I guess we're going to take a look at the players we think might make or break the chances of some of these contenders. And it's kind of interesting, too, because I was debating about it. I'm like, should I even mention it? Like a team like Georgia or Ohio State, where they're just loaded to the gills with talent. I'm not like, I could pick a player or two, but I'm at the same time, I could argue like they're so loaded that arguably no one player is really that vital to their success on the field or not. How did you approach it?
No, I definitely had the same thought with myself, and I will tell you, I did not pick a player from Georgia. I think that, like you said, they are just pretty solidly stacked everywhere when it comes to their position groups. I did ultimately end up picking a player from Ohio State, though, because I think that there's a specific position group I'm going to be keeping a very close eye on. But overall, right, like, yeah, you don't want to just pick teams who you know are going to be there, that you know are going to be there right at the end, because the reality is they're probably not going to define the playoff race the same way, right? Like if Georgia, like let's just say, for example, you pick like Branson Robinson, the really good running back over there, or a player like that. Well, it's probably the difference between being the 1 seed or the 5 seed for Georgia, just the way that we think that they're going to be heading into this playoff. So ultimately, how much does that actually shake up the race? To me, not a whole lot. We did have some of this conversation about Georgia before. Their schedule is tough. I think that they might actually lose. They'll definitely lose a regular season game. I'm going to go on the record right now and say they're going to lose a regular season game. I think it's possible that they lose 2. At the same time, they could lose 2 and probably be like the 7 seed with how tough their schedule is. So,
exactly.
So yeah, you wanted to find a balance, right? It's guys who could maybe elevate their teams up the college football playoff board, guys who kind of set a floor for their programs in a lot of ways. Some of the players who, if they were to get hurt, maybe make or break chances in a really significant way. And so yeah, do we need to focus too much on the teams that we're sure are going to be like? I didn't pick a player at Oregon either, another team that I think is going to be in the college football playoff. So you got to find a balance in some ways whenever you're looking at individual guys.
Well, I'd love to just then start kind of with Ohio State, not because I think this is the player that, because I didn't rank them in any particular order. I just kind of looked at the teams that were on that edge. Where did you look to at Ohio State? Because I could think of some options, but I'm curious which player you selected.
To me, it's a relative no-brainer. When you look at Ohio State, and look, you can throw quarterback into that with Will Howard coming in, of course. That's a little bit of a question mark, but there's a clear hole on this team heading into the year, just on paper. And that's the offensive line. This is an offensive line that wasn't all that good last year and lost production, right? 2 years ago, they were outstanding, one of the best in the entire country. And heading into 2024, they made some major additions, and that's where I'm going to go. The player who I picked was center Seth McLaughlin, who was last seen kind of messing some stuff up against the University of Michigan, a place that an Ohio State center probably doesn't want to be. He was formerly the starting center at Alabama. Unfortunately, became quite notorious for missing a couple of snaps. Actually, the final play of the game, he kind of messed up a snap, and Jalen Milroe had to panic and try to run into a bunch of traffic. So that's the last that we saw him. But if you take a step back from that, this is a 2-year starter at the University of Alabama. This is a player who, before the 2023 season, really hadn't been a poor snapper. It sort of, he ran into issues in 2023, and sometimes you just wonder, did it get in his head? Did he have the yips a little bit, right? Like I think that you just try to hope that things will be okay, right? Maybe he didn't respond to the way that he was being coached well at Alabama. Like, you just don't know with this stuff. Maybe he didn't have a good connection with Jalen Milroe. Like, it could be anything in a lot of ways. So I think that a lot of people kind of chuckled when they saw that the guy whose snaps cost a game against Michigan, that he decided to transfer to Ohio State. But I think that he's going to be a very important player. I do like the interior of this offensive line more than I like the exterior right now. I don't think that they figured stuff out at tackle last year, especially. Donovan Jackson, a guard, is one of the best that there is in the entire country. So I think that that's going to give them a little bit of a floor that they didn't have last year, just this interior combo. But if this line is, let's just say that they're a 60th percentile line in college football, I don't think that's good enough to reach the heights that Ohio State plans to reach this year. So Seth McLaughlin has to be not just a good player, but like I think content to be an all Big Ten player for Ohio State to be the legitimate, no doubt about it, top 2 team that I think that all of us think they can be.
I think that's a great idea because, I mean, as a selection, because if that offense is going to reach its full potential, especially obviously with Chip Kelly at the helm and the ability to take advantage of having Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins, that line is going to be vital. And then that'll open up things and allow, obviously they've got Emeka Egbuka and, Jeremiah Smith is supposed to be really hot. We'll see how he turns out. And give them and Will Howard an opportunity to throw some passes and obviously widen that out with that great running back room that they have there. I think that's a great choice to open it up. I was surprised with mine was also my first. And again, I'm just kind of going down my own top 25 here, just sort of thinking the teams. One of the early teams I also picked was Texas, only because you're replacing a couple of important wide receivers with, of course, Xavier Worthy and A.D. Mitchell. And while I was hesitant to necessarily go with transfers, I think Isaiah Bond is going to be an important part of that. In addition to Matthew Golden, Silas Bolden, and obviously they have a young recruit with Ryan Wingo, who's supposed to be great as well. But I think if that offense, and I don't have any serious doubts about Quinn Ewers. I know the Arch Manning thing's always going to be in the background. Great, bless it. But I think, Quinn Ewers has obviously the talent to make and probably will take a step forward in his career and probably be a Heisman contender at least early on in the season, if not developing into a serious finalist. I was also debating about the defensive line only because you're replacing some really incredible talent on that.
Well, we'll get to that in just a second. We'll get to that in just a second.
Well, okay, then I'll just say Isaiah Bond for now. I think he is the face of the revamped wide receiver room, and obviously he was a talent at Alabama, and I think Texas is a good place for him, and they're going to give him an opportunity to really shine, and he will return that favor if he succeeds and help Texas lead itself into the playoff.
No question about it. So, and another name, by the way, that I will mention at wide receiver is Jonte Cook, the former 5-star from the 2023 class. He also is going to be a big factor in that rotation. The player that I picked, though, is Alfred Collins, the defensive lineman from Texas. And there's a couple of reasons for this. One, the reviews of him coming out have been great, like really, really great. People think that he has a chance to be pretty special. He actually had a hotter start to his career than either Byron Murphy or T'Vondre Sweat. Like as a freshman, he was somebody in contributing. He didn't improve to the level that I think that people hoped. And obviously those other two guys just took a huge step forward later on in their careers. But Collins has bulked up. He's going to be playing on the interior of the defensive line. And I think that he just brings so much activity for Texas. And when you look at this team last year, the joke that I've made is that this is a team that was pretty good offensively, but like they were a defensive team in a lot of ways, the way that they shut down the run. And so ultimately, I think that the way that this interior defensive line combo comes along is going to be a huge part of their success. They're not going to be as good as last year. They're just not. But if they can mitigate some of those losses, especially when it comes to defending the run, I think that they have a chance to still be a potentially really, really good team. But if Alfred Collins struggles, if this interior defensive line combo takes a huge step back, I mean, like there are so many games on the schedule that Texas has a chance to lose.
Yeah, I think that's a great choice, and very curious to see how that Texas line actually works out. It's going to make both of those are going to be a huge difference in the SEC because I think that's the thing that sets Texas apart from. Maybe I'm giving. It's so funny because with Georgia we said they're just loaded to the gills. Oregon loaded to the gills. Texas they are, but it's still the SEC, and there's still the contenders in that are just such a challenge. My next team is going to be Notre Dame only because, and I know. Normally, I wouldn't pick a quarterback, but Riley Leonard is absolutely going to make or break that because their defense is solid. Absolutely. I'm pretty sure, even though they're replacing some key people on the offensive line with Joe Alt and Blake Fisher, I think they've got the talent to step up. I'm impressed by some of the receivers they brought in with Bo Collins and Chris Mitchell. But after Sam Hartman did not quite reach the heights they thought last season after transferring in, I'm a little more concerned about Riley Leonard. Obviously, he was a solid QB at Duke, but if Notre Dame is, and because everyone, like Notre Dame has a good schedule this season, Marcus Freeman really has not, I mean, the charmed year 3 thing keeps going over, but we could set that aside. But I mean, I think Notre Dame has that opportunity to reach the playoff, but if the quarterback does not quite work out like it did last season, they could end up looking on the outside in.
No, it's a great choice, and actually it leads right into mine, which is wide receiver Jaden Greathouse. I think that these two are very intertwined in a lot of ways, and there's two pieces of this that I like. One, I mean, I think that they at times didn't throw the ball enough last year, right? Like they really wanted to establish themselves in so many ways, and I don't think that they actually put their receivers in their passing game in the best position. But the other thing that I'll mention too is that Riley Leonard is a much more creative quarterback than what Sam Hartman was. Just in terms of like Sam Hartman was a player who came through the slow mesh system at Wake Forest. And so much of what he did was trying to be patient, trying to wait for things to open up, trying to wait for things to go downfield. And Riley Leonard is more of a master of chaos. He's more somebody who's going to respond well to being pressured, who's going to be able to take advantage and pick up some short yardage opportunities with his legs while still keeping his eyes downfield in many ways. So I think that this is going to be a much more natural fit. And another thing, by the way, at some point, we'll do a show of the 10 most important assistant coaches for the college football playoff this year. But I'll give you a sneak preview now. One of them is offensive coordinator Mike Denbrock, who just coached Jaden Daniels to the Heisman Trophy. So bringing him in here to coach this offense, I think is going to be a huge part of Riley Leonard having success too. But I do think that along with Riley Leonard, my question for Notre Dame is going to be weapons, because they lost. I mean, for their bowl game last year, they lost like all but 3 scholarship receivers on their entire team. It was crazy how many people just left in a short period of time. But ultimately, I think that Jaden Greathouse is the one who has a chance to be pretty special. We saw it early in his career. I actually was banging this drum in a lot of ways because I had watched him play at Austin Westlake down in Texas, and I think that, he showed a lot of what we hope to see from him when it comes to growing as a receiver. It'll be kind of interesting to see that they added some players in the portal to try and add a little bit more production around Jaden Greathouse. Bo Collins coming in from Clemson, who's a pretty good player. Jaden Harrison from Marshall. Chris Mitchell transferring in from FIU. But the guy who I think gives them the best chance to be special, by the way, former Notre Dame quarterback Tyler Buckner, also apparently going to be playing wide receiver, which is a whole other thing. I don't know if he's going to actually contribute, but I think that Greathouse is the alpha in the room, that if he can take that step and be 1,000-yard receiver, everything else around him suddenly looks a whole lot better.
That's a great choice. My next position, I was debating between 2 guys, but it's an important position for this team to break through, and that's Ole Miss. The one thing that kind of has always been their Achilles heel is that defensive line, and they brought in some real talent here with, obviously, from Florida, they got Princely, Uman Mielen, they got Walter Nolan from Texas A&M. If those guys can step up, I think Lane Kiffin finally has a team that's going to punch through and make the playoff. Because obviously, it's still amazing to think they had the most wins that the team has ever had last season. I guess Ole Miss has just always been had a season where you expect great things from them, and they just kind of fall a little short of that. And that goes from before, obviously, Lane Kiffin was there. But I think this is going to be the season where if that defensive line can put up at least enough pressure to kind of give that defense its edge, I think this is going to be the reason why Ole Miss will go, because their offense is terrific. I'm not going. I mean, the weakest thing on the offense, maybe it's going to be who's stepping up for Quinshon Judkins. Logan Diggs is a little dinged up from LSU. They brought Henry Parrish, which was fascinating to have him come back from Miami. But at the same time, I think the offense I'm not as worried about. It's really that defense, and that defensive line is going to be the key to whether or not the Rebels are able to break through into the playoff this season.
No, I also picked Walter Nolan ultimately as my pick, one of the top transfers that you mentioned from Texas A&M, and they've never been, like you mentioned, special in the trenches. They've been good. They've been good enough, certainly, in the trenches, but this is the kind of player that hasn't been at Ole Miss since Robert Kondiche, probably, right? Like a decade ago. That's the last time that they had a truly game-changing defensive line type prospect, especially on the interior. And Walter Nolan was rated by a lot of people as the number 1 overall player in the transfer portal because of the talent that he brings to the table. And the thing that I like too is certainly Walter Nolan's going to be chief among them, but they have a lot of players coming in who have a chance to contribute. I really like the depth that they have. And in so many ways, I think that Lane Kiffin understands that this is an opportunity for him. This is a moment for Ole Miss in so many ways. They bring in the number 1 overall transfer recruiting class, I think, because they know what's available to them if things work out. And I think that, like you said, it's going to be the defensive line that carries them to that next level if they get there.
How about you? What's your next guy?
Yeah, we're gonna stay in the SEC, and my next guy is going to be at the University of Alabama. There's a couple options that I considered, and I'll say too, we haven't really talked since SEC Media Days. Alabama was probably the team that I felt most like, oh, maybe I'm undervaluing them. Maybe I'm not taking them seriously enough. And especially talking to other people in the SEC, people who know these schools, people who understand what left, but is also still there at Alabama. But I do think that, and this is, by the way, a player that I almost considered, when Caleb Downs transferred from Alabama to Ohio State, it left a pretty gaping hole in Alabama's defense. The secondary is the youngest part of this team by far. They bring back Malachi Moore, but that's kind of it. So one of the biggest additions of the offseason, I think, was when Alabama added Michigan defensive back Keon Saab as a safety. He's somebody who I just think gives them a dynamic playmaker at the safety position. While he wasn't a starter for Michigan, he played a lot. Of course, with the way that Michigan played last year, a lot of players were able to play a lot. But, he was a major contributor for them, played even more as the season went on, I believe as a true sophomore. And now he has a chance to step into a legitimate starting role, a legitimate starring role, I think, as well. And again, like you look across this Alabama roster, you really like what they have at almost every other level, right? Like I think on offense, we know the transfers that they brought in and who they brought back on the offensive line. We love what they have at wide receiver. It's going to be, I think, that secondary is going to define the team in so many ways. And they have some young talent there, but they don't have older, experienced talent there. That's what I think Keon Saab brings to the table.
I think that's a great call, and you're absolutely right. The offense, it's another situation where if you pick a player on that offense, it's still Alabama. They're still going to have someone who can step up. Caden Proctor. It's great that he's back, but that's still a talented, offensive line that can probably be good with or without any one individual. Jeremy Bernard, great wide receiver, but it's not like Alabama has ever hurt for great wide receivers. And Jalen Milroe is obviously someone who is looking to go beyond that. And to say nothing against, Jamarian Miller and Justice Hayes in the running game. I think that offense is looking absolutely solid. So I think that's a great call. That secondary will be an interesting thing to observe, especially when they go in the SEC play. I'll stick with the SEC before we take a break, and I wanted to go with Mizzou only because last season was fantastic and a lot of expectations are there in Columbia to see if the Tigers can not only repeat the success of last season, but one up it and go into, they would have been a playoff team had we had a 12-team playoff this past season. So one of the big things was obviously losing Cody Schrader, that incredible story. I still love his story as a running back to go up from D2 to be just an SEC dominant running back. They have a couple of great transfers in Marcus Carroll from Georgia State and Nate Knoll from Alabama State, from Appalachian State. Alabama State's a great school. I just want to be clear of that, but from App State. You got kind of the bruiser with Carroll. You've got Knoll, who's a little bit more of an elusive player. They might do a tailback by committee. We'll see about that. But with all the attention that's going to be on, obviously having Brady Cook and Luther Burden, who's one of the greatest wide receivers out there, I think the need is going to be for that running game to continue and be successful. I'm having trouble picking one of the two, so I'm going to just go ahead and kind of give them the code name Marcus Carroll and Nate Knoll is if they can replace, I guess, an aggregate Cody Schrader, or if one of them becomes just the featured back. I mean, that's still quite possible. I think that will be the make or break whether or not Mizzou can continue the success of last season and head into the playoff here in the 12 teams era.
I like it.
All right. Well, when we get back, we're going to go ahead and run down several more players here on the College Football Survivor Show and see who we think might make a difference in this 12-team race.
The College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line.
All right. So, Shehan, who you got next?
Well, I think that this was a good time to take a break because I think that top five that we mentioned on my list, Ohio State, Texas, Alabama, Ole Miss, Notre Dame, those were five guys that I think were really going to shake the playoff from teams that I expect to be in the college football playoff. This next list is going to be more, for me at least, teams that are going to be on the cusp, that are going to be contending for one of those elusive spots. And so because of that, I'm going to go to the Big 12. I'm going to go to, you know what? I'm going to group two guys into one, actually, because it's kind of the same case for both. And that's Kansas's Jalen Daniels and Utah's Cameron Rising. Because it's kind of like, look, man, if these players stay healthy, they could win the Big 12 and be in the college football playoff. If they don't, I don't know if that's going to happen. I will say, I think that Utah has a much better chance of, if Cameron Rising gets hurt, of still being in contention. I hate saying this, I don't like what Kansas has at backup quarterback. I think that they might be screwed if Jalen Daniels can't be fully healthy. And I mean, just in the context of competing for the college football playoff. Obviously, they won 9 games last year without Jalen Daniels in the lineup. But if they're going to get to 10, 11, 12, which you have to do to make it out of the Big 12 and into the playoff, I think they need Jalen Daniels healthy. Utah made a really smart move by bringing in transfer Sam Heward from Cal Poly, formerly at Washington, a former 5-star prospect. That's a transfer that I think could carry you for a game or two, right? Like that I think could settle things down a little bit. The way, in some ways, that Jason Bean was able to for Kansas last year. I don't think that Kansas has that guy. I don't think that they have the guy who can help them tread water for a competitive game or two. So I'm going to group those two together, Utah and Kansas, Cameron Rising and Jalen Daniels.
I like it. I was debating about Cam Rising for Utah. And I said, like, that's going to be one that is pretty actually. And Jalen Daniels was the other one. I'm like, those are going to be very easy ones to go with. Yeah. I actually decided with Utah to go with Brant Kuithe, because Dalton Kincaid, who's obviously now he's in the NFL, he was an incredible tight end, and Brant Kuithe is too, but he was injured for last season and having him back there and giving that weapon to, assuming Cam Rising, but again, I think they'll have some step up, will be an important part of, because again, Utah's one of those teams where the defense, we're just going to take for granted that defense is going to be incredible, and that's what Utah just does. That's their brand of football. Micah Bernard is probably going to be a solid running back. Dorian Singer as a transfer seemed to be a good wide receiving partner for Cam Rising in their spring game. So I think I'm going to go with Brant Kuithe, only because I think the opportunity to see him return to where he was will give that offense a little more dynamism that will potentially give them the opportunity to win in the Big 12. And it's funny, too, because Cam Rising was debating about it. And then when I heard you say, like, I love how you set it up, because I'm like, he's going to go with those two quarterbacks. And two guys I was strongly debating about. Oh, my goodness. I love it. I'll take us to the next one, because why don't we just stay in the Big 12 for a second? Because the other player I was thinking of, because Kansas State is a tricky situation there, because Avery Johnson is a quarterback who is stepping. Obviously, Will Howard's now at Ohio State, but at the same time, it's one of those circumstances where he's going to be important, but I think for him to be able to develop into a full quarterback, because we saw some good signs in the Pop-Tarts Bowl against NC State. I mean, he did respectable job passing, and obviously he had some great moves on the ground. But for that to really work, you need that ground game to just be good in and of itself. So obviously they have DJ Giddens. I'm going with Dylan Edwards, the Colorado transfer, who was a great running back for Colorado and that entire system in and of itself, which I'm not going to go into that whole circus in and of itself. So I thought if Kansas State is going to be able to rise up and be, because I mean, everyone knows right now, the Big 12, it's like Utah, K-State, Oklahoma State, probably Kansas are your 4 that you're keeping an eye on. Arizona, maybe. I mean, it is the most, as I say it out, I keep reminding myself, no, they are the most even conference out there in the P4. But I'm going to go and say that if we can get a lot out of Dylan Edwards, I think K-State will have an opportunity to kind of boost itself above the other teams in the conference and take that, if not the championship. I mean, probably the championship was, it's debating. Like, they could still be an at-large team. I think the Big 12 could still send 2. I think that is still very possible, and at-large should go to the Big 12. So that'll be one of those one of the decisive factors for them.
No, I mean, the Big 12, this is what I've said, is that, a lot of people have asked me this offseason, is the Big 12 going to be a multi-bid league this year? And what I've said is that I could see them having 5 teams in the top 20. Like, I think it could be that good. Here's the issue. It might be 1 in the top 12. And it might be 4 teams between 13 and 20, just because of how things might stack up, right? So that's going to be my big complication with them, is can they just get another right to 9 or something? In some ways, I think over the next couple of years, the best thing might be, okay, let's say that Utah goes 11-1 and 8-1 in conference. maybe the best thing is for them to like lose the conference title game so that the winner of the conference title game gets in, but then Utah at 11-2, they still, I think, would have a really good shot to get in. Anyway, that's a whole other conversation. But no, I like that a lot. Let's close things out a little bit in the Big 12 too, actually. So Arizona, I think, is one of the more interesting teams this offseason because they managed to keep their core together with quarterback Noah Fafita, with wide receiver Tetairoa McMillan. They bring in a transfer at wide receiver in Montana, Lemonias Craig, right? Like, so they've got their core together. Tacario Davis comes back at cornerback. Like, they've got some really, really good players that are coming back. Where they don't have as many guys coming back is the defensive line. And several of these players, Bill Norton among them, transferred to the University of Texas. They followed Johnny Nansen, the former defensive coordinator. They brought in a transfer, a JUCO guy, if I remember right, Chubba Mae. He comes from actually, I think it might be from the FCS level. He's coming up, but he is a big body. He is athletic. He is dynamic. He moves well for how much size that he has. He's the kind of like inside like situation, right? Like he's the kind of player that you want inside to try to continue that lineage that they had last year. I talked to Arizona players at Big 12 Media Days, but I think that that ultimately, like, they feel like they need to be a defense first team in order to reach the heights that they want to reach. And I think that, long term, I think that Chubby Mae could be that guy who has a chance to do it.
That's a good one. And Arizona is going to be really interesting to see how they play out here. I'm very curious. I think we've talked about them before in terms of when we were at a previous show about the power teams that have moved around. And before that budget shortfall perhaps starts to affect that university, I think this is going to be an important season, especially with Coach Brennan there in his first year. My next team is Florida State because they were replacing so much, and it was interesting because obviously a lot of attention is on DJ Uiagalelei. Bringing him from stop 3 after Clemson and Oregon State. He's a promising player. You've got some good running backs. You brought in, Rydell Williams from Alabama. But the question is, you've lost Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson to the NFL. Who's going to be the receiver to step up? I know there's some questions, especially beyond the top receivers. How young is a receiver room going to end up when they get really into the season? But right now, Alabama transfer Malik Benson seems to be the wide receiver number 1. And they're going to need him to step up if they want that offense to be as potent as it has been before. And he, as a leader, has that opportunity, being an upperclassman. I believe he's a senior this season, to really kind of pull the rest of that receiving room up. And if, again, this is an interesting season, I think Florida State is probably one of the choice teams in the ACC without a doubt. But if they are to achieve that, we're going to have to see them return that offense to where it was. And one of those key components is going to be receivers led by Malik Benson.
I'm going to actually stick in the ACC at wide receiver specifically as well. Clemson, the funny thing when you talk about their quote unquote downfall of the past couple of years is that Dabo Swinney is a receivers coach by trade. He put, Mike Williams, Sammy Watkins, all these great players into the NFL. And they have not been good at that position over the past couple of years. They brought in a former 5-star in Bryant Wesco from the state of Texas, actually, who I think has a chance to be pretty special. They say that he's grown a whole lot. They say that that he, again, has a chance to be really special. And this is the kind of player who Clemson has not been getting over the past 3 or 4 years. And so I think that long term, like, he is one of those players that's going to give Cade Klubnik a downfield threat, give him just a little bit more of a safety blanket. And when Clemson is trying to rebuild their offense, by the way, with an offensive coordinator in Garrett Riley, who rode Quentin Johnston and Max Duggan to a college football playoff appearance, I think that Bryant Wesco is a player who has that level of upside.
I think that's a great call. I am also going to just kind of round up my own ACC selection. By the way, I have to say Clemson was on my list, and absolutely it was actually that individual. I was like, they need someone to step up at the wide receiver. I'm going to go with NC State. So obviously we all know Grayson McCall, that he should work. I mean, it's Coastal Carolina's QB. He's been a tremendous QB his entire career. They've got some good receivers coming in with him. Noah Rogers from Ohio State, Wesley Grimes from Wake Forest. But really, the person that is going to be a key, well, I admit I debated about this. Do I go with Jordan Waters, the transfer running back, because that's been a weak area for the Wolfpack? But at the same time, Casey Concepcion, their star wide receiver, who was ACC Rookie of the Year last season, I think that is going to be one of the reasons. That's going to be one of the stars that will help NC State, because we've seen how incredible it is to have a superstar wide receiver. That has made a difference for so many teams. Penn State wishes they had one. Maybe they'll come up later in this show as who might be the person to step up for them. But I decided to go with Casey Concepcion because I think his success on the field will be an important part of why NC State's also able to punch out of where they've always been. They've always been good, but to punch out to that level where they finally break through, if they can this season, it's going to be with the talent of some of their best players, and I think Casey Concepcion is going to lead that.
You know, it's interesting, right? Like, I look at this list, we've picked so many wide receivers. Like, I think that it feels like in college football right now, there's been like kind of this shift where back, 10 years ago, and I think it's partially to do with the kind of systems and kind of defenses that you're playing. I think that like when you look at the receiver position, in some ways it's never been harder to play like in the high passing era because of, I mean, you're going against like 5-man shells, you're going against dime defenses sometimes. Like you have to, I think, be a lot more technically sound than maybe you did have to be in the early air raid days or maybe 10-15 years ago. So anyway, just an interesting observation that I think makes a lot of sense. I'm going to close out with two guys. Well, I'll go the one first, but with two guys from the group of 5, because of course they are fighting for a playoff spot, and that's going to be a fascinating dynamic. The first, I'm just going to go with who might be the best overall player in the group of 5, frankly, and that's Boise State running back Ashton Jeanty. He was a beast last year, just a tremendous player. He does it in the passing game, he does it in the rushing game, he breaks tackles, he hurdles over guys. Like he is a complete running back. From I got a chance to talk to him last year, like or last week, and I mean, like, people went after him in the portal, like big time programs with big offers. He decided to stay at Boise State, where he has a chance to do something that's never been done at Boise State, which is go to the college football playoff and kind of get back to what they were in the 2000s. So he's the kind of face of the program type player who I think could potentially be a game-changing type player who, like, we'll see what they do this year, right? They got to do the thing. They got to win the Mountain West. They have to finish in the top 12. But, like, that's how you become a legend at a place, is by being a player like Ashton Jeanty. And while I obviously tried to not just pick the best player on most of the teams that I picked a player for, I think that especially at the group of 5 level, you need your stars to show out.
Absolutely. Just to kind of, before we move off of Boise State, I was thinking about that, and also how much Malachi Nelson, the USC transfer quarterback, is also going to play into that. Because if he can, I mean, at what level do they need from him to allow Jeanty to play to that level and also elevate that team to where they will win the Mountain West and potentially get into that spot?
Well, I'll tell you what, talking to people around Boise State, like, they know what he can do, but like I wouldn't be shocked if he's not the starter, actually. Like they are a little physically, I think that they were hoping he'd come along a little more. Apparently he's just having a lot of trouble putting weight on, which I think is something that we heard when he was at USC as well. And now going into the Big Ten, it makes sense why they didn't feel comfortable kind of moving forward with him, at least for next year. But I think that they need to get moderate production from that quarterback game. But this is a defense and run the ball team, right? Like this is one of those where you can game manage at the quarterback position, and I think just about be okay. The one thing that's going to be a complication is they have a loss in week 2. They're playing Oregon in week 2. I think that if you get destroyed, right? Like if you get libertied in week 2, I think it's I think like that might actually, even if you're 11-1, cost you a spot. If you're just like competitive, if you just make it look all right, I think you're in good shape. But going on the road to Oregon in week 2, that's going to be an interesting battle.
So who's your other G5?
Yeah, a similar deal, right? So I think that the other group of 5 team to keep a close eye on is probably Memphis coming out of the AAC. I think that that's potentially the team to beat. Such an interesting battle though, right? You got Memphis, you got Tulane, you got UTSA. I think they're all going to be just about similar quality. South Florida, maybe even you put in there. And there's a chance, right, that these teams just beat each other up and nobody is a one loss team potentially by the end of the year. And I think that 11-1/12-1 with a conference title game is probably what you need to get to make the college football playoff. But I'm gonna go with their quarterback Seth Hennigan. He's grown a lot over the past couple of years. He was a below 60% passer his first year on campus. Last year he hit 67%. He's a 32-9 touchdown to interception ratio guy, and they need someone who is dynamic at that position. They need somebody who's going to be able to go downfield, stretch the field just a little bit, and keep them on schedule. So I think that Seth Hennigan is going to be on the short list of the best group of 5 quarterbacks, along with guys like Caden Salter at Liberty. But I do think that they need him to take another step to be a college football playoff team that can go through the AAC at 11-1 or better.
I'm not going to necessarily pick Liberty as one of my teams, but I did think of Caden Salter, but also they have a good running back with, I think his name is Quentin Cooley. And you need to have balance in any offense. And I think that's going to be one of those factors where if the Flames manage to make it, although a lot of other people have to flame out, for them to do that. But I think I think that dynamic will be important for them. I'm going to wrap up my particular list with actually one more Big 12 team, and that's Oklahoma State. Because obviously we all know Ollie Gordon, especially after what happened right before media days. So we'll set aside the off the field stuff. I think, and again, Alan Bowman was another person I was thinking of. He's a 7th-year quarterback. But I was thinking about Ollie Gordon. They're going to be putting a lot on his shoulders. And I think the fact that they were able to get Indiana's lead rusher, Trent Howland, to help lessen that load, I think he's going to be an important part of whether or not Oklahoma State can actually maintain that whole season, because everyone's going to be gunning for Ollie Gordon. Everyone. And I mean, there's only so much that you can do, and the wear and tear on a running back is well established and well known. So you're always concerned about that. And to have someone who can be not only who can relieve the load and potentially match the talent of the person who's already on the field. And I know how tough that is. Ollie Gordon is an absolutely phenomenal running back. I think that will be one of the factors that will help the Cowboys again ascend, because they're one of those teams again that they've been for. I don't know if they've just fallen a little bit further behind than where they were a decade ago, or maybe less than a decade ago, when we were always wondering, they're gonna potentially get into the playoff. Even in the 4-team era and even in the BCS era, there were moments where we wondered if the Cowboys could finally break through. But I think this season, if they can maintain the running game and maintain the offense, it'll be more than just Ollie Gordon. You can't just have him run the entire offense. You're going to need more than that. No matter how many times they make him carry in that first game or whatever joke was. So that's what I'm going to wrap up with. I'm going to go with Trent Howland.
I like the pick. No, I mean, I think it is funny, right? Like, you go through the schools that we listed, so many schools from the Big 12, especially, right on that line, right on that line of being in the college football playoff. Like I talk about, could be 4 or 5 teams in the top 20. And then, it'll be fascinating too, right? The number of group of 5 teams that get into the conversation, the number of ACC teams that are able to contend with Clemson and Florida State. Like, one that I didn't end up picking was, Francis Mauigoa, the offensive lineman, offensive tackle at Miami, because Miami is also going to be one of those teams that's right on the edge of contending as well. But overall, I really like our list overall. I think, just to run through mine, I said Seth McLaughlin at Ohio State, Alfred Collins at Texas, Keon Staub, the safety at Alabama, Walter Nolan at Ole Miss, Jaden Greathouse at Notre Dame. Then after the break, Ashton Ginty at Boise State, Seth Hennigan at Memphis, Bryant Wesco, the wide receiver at Clemson, Cameron Rising and Jalen Daniels at Utah and Kansas. I cheated there a little bit. And Chubba Mae, the defensive tackle at Arizona.
Yeah, the only other player I was debating about including that I did not is again, because Michigan's another one of those teams where The quarterback is still a mystery. I still don't know how we haven't. I get the logic of it, but Donovan Edwards was who I was thinking of there as a running back. Who, I mean, talented running back, and they might be relying on him to establish. Again, it's Sharon Moore, so absolutely they're going to need. They love that running game there. So it'll be interesting to see how he works out. But yeah, no, this was a good list. This was a fascinating exercise. There's so many. And again, with so many of these teams, there could be people that step up and make up the difference if such a person can't make it through. We want all these guys to be healthy the whole season. We absolutely do. But I thought this was a great list, and I think it's fascinating. I'm looking forward to putting together some more of these important people that will make or break potential teams in this race as we get closer to the college football playoff season, the 12-team playoff season, which is absolutely going to be a delight. Well, I want to thank all of you for listening. I want to thank our producer, Joey Aliberti. Be sure if you get a chance to like, rate, and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. You can find us on X and TikTok at CFB Survivor Show. He's Shehan Jayaraja. You can find his work at cbssports.com and at Shehan Jayaraja on X and TikTok. I'm Bobak Kyeri. Later today, I'm going to be hopping on a plane to Indianapolis to go check out what they're going to be saying at the Big Ten brand of Dog and Pony Show. I'm part of the group that runs Reddit CFB. So thanks for listening, everyone.
The College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line.